for me, everything starts with, if there's no job, I'm not sure actually how to innovate.
Willkommen bei Innovate and Upgrade. Mein Name ist Peter Rochel und dies ist der Podcast von Oberwasser Consulting. Hier geht es um Tools, Methoden und Praxis der strategischen Unternehmensentwicklung. Es geht um Business Model Design, um Jobs-to-be-Done, Unternehmenskultur, agile Organisation und Wissensmanagement, weil all das untrennbar miteinander verwoben ist und die Zukunft von Unternehmen bestimmt. Schön, dass du dabei bist. Dies ist Episode 29 und diese Episode ist etwas ganz Besonderes und zwar auf zwei Arten. Erstens werden wir heute ausschließlich Englisch sprechen nach diesem Intro. Zweitens sprechen wir Englisch, weil unser Gast für heute oder weil mein Gast für heute der Innovationspapst, kann man schon fast sagen, oder einer der größten in diesem Bereich, nämlich niemand Geringeres als Bob Moesta. Hallo und herzlich willkommen, Bob. Schön, dass du da bist.
Good morning. I'm very excited to be here as well. I lived in Germany. I actually lived in Cologne, but my German is way too rusty to be able to even think about trying to do this in German.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't expect you to speak German in this episode with me. But about Bob Moesta, you are the one who wrote the book, the Jobs-to-be-Done handbook. You're playing a really central role in the development of the Jobs-to-be-Done theory, I think so. And what probably many people don't really know yet is the fact that you have been the one behind that idea, asking a different kind of questions in that famous milkshake story. You were the one who had those this idea.
Yeah, so Clay talks about that, but anywhere else there was a team. It was Rick Peedy and Julian Wesson and some other people involved as well. But I was part of that development team and the wrestling of kind of how do we actually figure out how to develop something new that people aren't necessarily asking for. And so it's that notion of finding those struggling moments and where do people want to make progress, and how do we, when people can't talk about it or they don't have the language for it, how do we actually figure out how to design something? And so the frame that we end up wrapping around it was called Jobs to be Done. I actually used that frame earlier in my career around the notion of I had worked in Japan, and what was interesting was in the US, they had taught us how mostly about engineering and engineering problems. And so in a lot of cases, we would go and solve problems, but every time I'd solve one problem, I'd create another. And in Japan, they talked about this notion of what they called whack-a-mole, and that if you don't actually understand the function of something, you don't actually understand how it works. And so, and what would happen is metrics should be more about what the function and the transformation of the energy you're trying to do, as opposed to the failure rates. And so I use the word of job to be done as what's the job to be done of a timing belt, for example. And most people would say, well, it's not supposed to wear, it's not supposed to vibrate and make noise, but ultimately it's about being able to transfer energy from the crankshaft up to the timing, up to basically the camshaft, so you can actually get timing. And so and the more efficiently it does that, and the more I actually figure out how to do that with the least amount of energy, then I have no side effects of wear or noise or those other things. And so part of it was being able to learn those things. And so once we kind of established that, we kind of then flipped it into the realm of using it as well, what job is the customer trying to get done? And then from there went to kind of the hiring and firing criteria and that kind of stuff. So, I always say myself as one of the architects and one of the kind of the underlying people to help frame it. I think my Japanese experience helped influence it, but there are other people who kind of helped do it. I think Tony Ulwick had, and around actually the same time, had some similar kind of things, but he ended up calling it outcome-driven innovation, and really kind of focused it on unpacking and using what we would call QFD and ways in which to have weighting systems down to the features and the attributes and the characteristics of the product. So that's the realm where I think all this kind of started, and that was. For me, that was everything from 87 to 88 to 92. And then the milkshake was our attempt to try to actually develop our own product and bring it to a company. And that was in 95, 96.
Okay, but one question that I've been asked always in many workshops and stuff is, what did really happen then after that with that information? What did they do with it?
Yeah, the interesting part is that we end up being able to find the opportunity, and it was really based on what was the least productive piece of equipment in the store, and trying to say, how do we actually find and create an opportunity where it can actually serve in either a new area or a new thing. And so the notion was, how do we actually find out how to basically use the milkshake machine in the morning, kind of thing. And we found some places where it did it. Julia did some great jobs designing what I would call our ultimately being basically smoothies, yogurt-based kind of drinks with protein and things that are very common today. But back in '96, there were none of these things. And the ultimate thing is that it was rejected by one firm that basically it was too hard to clean from one shift to the next. But the reality is that 17 years later they end up launching a whole new line of products that include what we had discovered 17 years before, and now they're the largest seller of smoothies in the world. So it's almost like we were too early, and it was a combination of the problem of that cleaning aspect posed some new problems that had to be done. And so it was enlightening, and at the same time realizing that innovation is more than just the idea. It's all about the execution, and we really didn't get a second chance to go back and fix that part of it. So again, every project you do, everything you make, you learn from, and so it just helped us kind of have a wider perspective. In the end, the test did very well, but the reality is it was too hard to actually make it, I'll say, across all the franchisees.
Yeah, I think it's been in competing against luck, where there was this notion that I was saying that it wasn't implemented or
Nope.
something like that because of management decisions. Or
Well, the interesting part is we actually went in and did some work prior to that work, and it was about helping them understand a new product they were going to launch. And it was like, it really didn't do a new job. It was what we would call a sustaining innovation, and we called it out as a sustaining innovation, though they actually invested in it as if it was a disruptive innovation. And in the end, we kind of were able to predict exactly what was going to happen. And when it happened, they kind of came back and said, almost a year and a half later, they kind of said, you were right. Boy, what else can you help us with? So it was one of those things where I think the fact is you're constantly competing with what I would say are the old ways, and figuring out, again, eventually jobs will be the old way and somebody will come up with something better. But I believe that it's that notion that they had spent millions of dollars in research and product development to build what they had, and they didn't want to hear that it wasn't going to work.
you just mentioned sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. In his new book, Clay writes about 3 different types of innovation, which are sustaining innovation, efficiency innovation, and he don't call it disruptive innovation, but market creating innovation. Is it like all of these 3 kinds of innovation are built on jobs to be done?
I think it's that's one of the things is like, again, so I run a small little design innovation firm where we help people create new products and services. And for me, everything starts with, if there's no job, I'm not sure actually how to innovate. And so I think Clay has built kind of that whole notion. I think in some cases, for example, in efficiency innovations, I'm not sure you need to know jobs, but it actually helps, because if you don't understand kind of the underlying principles of what job you're doing and you go to build efficiencies, you can actually destroy the underlying business model. And so the best example of that is here in the US, we have a company called Dollar General, and Dollar General actually had a horrible distribution system in terms of half the time people would never know it was going to show up at the back door. And so one of the jobs that they did was fundamentally it was almost like a product hunt or a, like I'm coming here and I don't know what I'm going to see, but whatever I'm going to see, if I need it, I'm going to buy it. And so it was this notion of kind of almost being like a garage sale kind of notion of like I can walk in and find 20 bamboo torches or something like that, and so when they actually fixed their distribution system and now they had actually ways to manage the shelf and they had more predictability, they saw actually sales go down because all of a sudden people, there were no more surprises and they were actually counting on the surprises.
Okay. Bob, let's talk a bit about finding out about jobs to be done and what is and where are jobs to be done and how to find them. In trainings and workshops and in my work, I always tell and I strongly believe that the jobs to be done interview or the interview itself is one of the most efficient ways to find out jobs to be done. Is it possible that there are other ways to find out or to find out better about jobs to be done than doing interviews?
Well, I think the notion is to think of it as a tool. Like I know there's a lot of kind of mindset pieces around it, and some people have said it's a philosophy and all this. I just think about it as a tool, and ultimately it's kind of like the premise by which somebody's going to say, I'm going to stop using this one piece of software and I'm now going to pick up this new piece of software. And part of it is to realize it's kind of the rules that have been wrapped around it. And what happens is being able to understand what I call the big hire, for people to say, like, we're going to move from high rise to Salesforce, right? It's like there's some premise of the context they're in and the outcome that they want that judge the overall success of it, and the people who are buying it have a very different view of it than the people who are using it. And so there's this notion of the big hire and being able to understand that progress, and at the same time be able to understand the little hires, which are the things that help the salespeople sell more, and the reports that help the managers actually figure out how to motivate differently or to set different goals or different things. And so part of this is being able to understand that both of those have to be fulfilled for you to build a great product. And most people either think about the little hires, and I would say in the beginning, I built really good, I would say great products at the little hire level, but it was very hard to basically feature myself in to have people switch. And so the switching interview is what a lot of people know about, but there's still a set of interviews you need to know about the little hires of where do you struggle when you try to use it? Where do you want to use it but you can't? Where do you use it when you shouldn't? There's a whole bunch of interviews around this little hire. So for example, in chewing gum, most people can't remember when they buy the pack of gum, but they can remember when they chewed gum. And so we can talk about a bunch of sets of little hires and then figure out where to be. So when they run out of gum, we can be there, right? And so it's more about the interview, like you said, but it really gets back to the objective at hand and what you need to learn.
So, but it's not like that you believe that there will be a way soon to just search big data and use artificial intelligence to find jobs and save time on doing interviews and.
Well, I think the thing is that there's two things around that. I think part of it is as you start to talk to people about struggling moments, you realize there's very little language around it, and for AI to work, there has to be a set of codified data. And so part of it is I believe that as people start to think about the future and talk about the future, they can only reference the past. And so part of this is being able to, in the way we do interviews, it's more about circling the area, but then we have to sometimes maybe either build new language or understand experiential language. And so I believe in 100 years from now, we'll be able to kind of look at these things. But I think the notion is most big data is not connected through time. I think one of the best examples of where I think things are doing that is there's a ring. It's called Aura, Oura. And what it's doing is it's not only taking your vitals and basically in a moment by moment basis, but then aggregating it and basically saying like, so for me, it basically helps understand how well I slept, how well was my workout yesterday, what was my activity level. And if I did a lot yesterday and I didn't sleep well last night, then I probably shouldn't do these things. And so it's able to actually help me understand how to structure my day based on how well I slept, what I did yesterday, and the fuel that I have. And so it's this notion of being able to be a little bit more predictive for me, but it doesn't predict what I should do Saturday. It only predicts what I should do today. And so I think there's those kinds of things. And I don't know if we're going to find AI that's going to basically tell us what we should have for dinner on Tuesday. I think it's going to be in the moment.
Yes, and you need a lot of rich context to understand a
That's right.
problem thoroughly. So
Yeah. But to build on that, what we have been able to do is see patterns. So, for example, I have a book coming out called Choosing College, and it's coming out in September. I think it's in August, and it's more about like we were able to do a bunch of interviews of what caused people to say, why am I going to college? What's the context I'm in, and what's the outcome that I seek? And the interesting part is that most people just average everything. And it's like, well, they're just 18-year-olds going to college, to figure out what they want to define themselves and figure out a career. But it turns out it's not the case. There's actually very distinct pathways, as Todd Rose would say, that people have. And by one, acknowledging what context you're in and what outcome you want, it should be able to help you pick what's the best educational experience for what you're trying to achieve. And right now, most people are picking on, where are my friends going? What's close to my house? What is that? Like all these different kinds of things, and not realizing that there are more and more alternatives. And so this book called Choosing College really starts to think about kind of before you pick what you're going to do, let's give you a way to think about this so you can actually choose better. And so this is the first in a series of books that I'm writing with Michael Horn and a few others. Like one is choosing your next vacation. And so it's like, what's the context you're in? Is this about bonding with the family? Is this about doing some experiences? This is about unwinding. And there's trade-offs that everybody has to make. And though somebody can go design the ideal experience, the reality is that at some point in time, we all have to make trade-offs. And so this is preparing people to understand, like, you might be able to actually go to the same place and create 4 or 5 completely different experiences based on kind of the context that you're in and the outcomes that you seek and the outcomes that the other people in your party seek for a vacation. And so I think there will be some big data stuff. I think it's more about, though, finding the pathways as opposed to being ridiculously predictive.
So what you said about choosing college, that sounds to me a bit what we experience here in Germany, where when we apply jobs to be done, often it happens in a business to business context, and
Yep.
it's I think it's it's a bit more complicated. As for example, you did this famous interview about buying a Volkswagen Jetta. They have only
Oh yeah.
one person who has taken the decision. Maybe he's asking or has to ask his wife or not, whatever. But like choosing college, or like for example in a business to business context, is it the same? Is it the same way how to find out what jobs and where to build a better products on, or is it a complete different thing, or is it the same, just a little bit more complex?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So part of it is that the easiest way to learn it or where to learn it is to understand when progress is defined by an individual, right? And so the challenge is when in a business to business situation. So again, what progress is the company making by agreeing to basically switch to Salesforce? And what you have is you have the CFO, the VP of sales, the VP of IT. They all have in their minds different dimensions of what progress means. And so part of it is being able to understand their jobs, and then, to be honest, understand who's actually driving it and who makes what compromises. So in some cases, it's a little bit of a power analysis in terms of who's got the most power, but the other part is in the end how does the progress get shaped up, and what are the main reasons that they all agree on for what they're trying to accomplish? Is this more about visibility and transparency? Is this more about being able to react faster? Is this actually more about minimizing turnover? Like there's a whole bunch of reasons why they do it, and I'll say what the obvious reasons are, but when you dig past it, you start to realize that it's way more. It's both social, emotional, and functional. Besides, like, we just want better data to know how to manage the sales force. That's the I'll say that's the obvious one, but it's not necessarily the only and underlying cause. And so, to me, all of these are sets of causes. So when you pull a root out of the ground, there's not one root. They actually have tentacles into many areas, like a mind map. And so, to me, it's the set that we're trying to understand, and what are the important sets of both pushes and pulls that actually define what to do next. And that's what we're actually trying to uncover. And so, in a B2B case, you might actually have to interview 2 or 3 or 4 different contingencies to understand where that power is, and how they found the budget, and how they actually made the decision, and who was responsible for the timing, and what were they afraid of, and what were the anxieties. So in some cases, it might be that instead of doing 10 interviews, you have to do 25, because you got to do some CFOs and some VP of sales and some VP of IT around both the same companies and even in different companies.
Is it like when you're preparing the screener for your jobs to be done interview guests or partners for business-to-business interviews, is it like you would talk in the first place to the ones who are using the product, or is it more about the ones that have to spend the money or taking the decisions about will I spend money for a new product or not, or who?
I always want to talk to people who've already they've bought something, they've committed to something and have tried something. Whether it's working or not, it doesn't really matter to me. I think the fact is I need them to be past that point of what were they hoping for? How did they get to that? So, for example, you hear this word, for example, well, I ended up trusting this person. And you're like, wait a second, whoa, that's big. For me, that's a big word. And I'm like, your old vendor you've known for 25 years, and, do you trust them? And they would say no. I'm like, so what happened? And they're like, well, we have problems. They make a list. They make some progress on it, but they actually never make any. They actually never do it. We end up every time we meet, we just keep adding to the list. It feels like they don't care, because they're never proactively seeing these things. They're always just reacting to us, and it feels like it's just an ongoing battle. And I'm like, okay, so then how did you trust somebody who you'd met 5 times? And they're like, oh, that was easy. I'm like, what do you mean? I said, the first meeting was, we invited 5 people in. This person actually brought nothing in. They just wanted to learn about my business. I said, why is that important? He says, well, most people are either trying to intimidate us or say, hey, we have all these customers and we know all these things, and here's our menu, pick from the menu. And it's more putting it on us. And the reality is the fact that when I was looking for somebody who was willing to build a relationship. The second is they didn't bring back one answer. They brought back 3 answers. So they gave me alternatives to actually educate me, as opposed to here's what you need and we'll go do it. And that aspect of being able to go back and forth. And then it was like, well, are these the cheapest people? He goes, it turns out they're not the cheapest people. And I said, why? He goes, in the end, the cheapest people would literally, they couldn't tell us no. And what I realized is that was part of the problem of the first person, and the reason why we actually didn't trust the people in the first place, the original suppliers, because they would never tell us no, and they would get up into trouble. But the ultimate thing that helped us get to the point of where I felt I trust them is when I actually purposely asked something that I knew they couldn't do, and I wanted to see what they did. And when they said, you know what, we can't do that, and they were willing to walk away, I knew they were the right vendor. And so it was a very interesting notion of like, these are the 5 things you have to do to cause trust in a sales process.
Yeah, it's surprisingly funny or not. When you talk to people in the B2B context, it's like when they describe how they usually behave and what they would do and should do and
Yeah.
stuff like that. That's one story. And when it comes to taking a decision and what really happened and what they really did, it's never really fitting well in that
Oh,
description of the processes
yeah,
they.
there's this really weird artificial notion of like we have an objective process where we get three bids and those three bids get really scrutinized and then we pick the best vendor based on those three bids. It's like, yeah, but how do you pick? And you're like, and ultimately it's like sometimes it's low cost, sometimes it's not. And part of it is how do you actually know when they're in that situation? And what I would say is the more they struggle and the more you can actually educate and the more you can actually help them understand the problem, because a lot of times companies are actually looking at symptoms and not actual problems, and helping them actually understand the root of what the issues are, they'll actually pay more because they actually understand, and to be honest, sometimes they end up knowing more than the vendor who's selling to them.
So when you collected all that data, recorded interviews and stuff, and it's all safely and securely stored,
Yeah.
and it comes to analyzing it for finding finally those jobs, push and pull factors and stuff, pains and gains and whatever. It's like we have qualitative data that has to be analyzed, and this is not only in jobs to be done, but anywhere in science where it comes to the use of qualitative data. It is always a big story, and it's always hard, and there are many different ways to do it. And oftentimes it happens that researchers then prefer to switch to quantitative data because it's easier to analyze. Um, you said in the last time that we've been talking, you told me that in the beginning, or not in the beginning, but 9 to 10 years ago, you needed about 90 days to analyze a set of interviews. And the same thing you could do basically right now in a week. And so the question is, what has changed in these years, and
Yep.
what tools are you using to do it?
So to me there's two parts to that question. One is people in some cases are very skeptical of qualitative data, and the reality is that when you start to think about how we create innovation data, we ask the consumer about what they want in the future, right? And in some cases we might ask them about products, we might ask them about situations, we might ask them about, but for the most part nobody actually knows what they're going to do next. And so I think part of this is that somehow we've built this level of comfort around quantitative data that I had 1,000 people answer that we're going to have chicken on Tuesday. And out of that survey, I had 38% say chicken. And so I'm pretty sure people are going to have chicken on Thursday, but they really don't know whether they're going to have chicken on Thursday or not. Right. And so part of this is this is Deming, who was one of my mentors very early on, was, everything is caused. And so part of it is being able to understand causality, and that causality doesn't change quickly. And so part of it is can you actually understand the causality from last week? That causality is just somebody now going through that causality and will cause them to pick chicken next week. But I can actually then use that to understand what's next. And so part of this is that notion of being able to pull out and peel back the right information. And so I just did a podcast with Todd Rose at the Harvard Business School last week or 2 weeks ago, and we talked about this difference between picking and choosing, and that people, when you pick, it's usually a curated list, and that it's actually less mindful, and that it's easier for people, but they're actually less engaged. And the more that you have to choose something, that you have to actually engage with kind of both the social and emotional aspects of, how do I choose my next car? I don't believe you pick a next car, you choose it, right? And it's a subtle difference, but the notion here is that as you start to see those things, the causality is different. The other part is that we end up building surveys, and in a lot of cases, the way we do research, we end up having to have hypotheses going in. And to me, one of the most important things, at least for me, as I practice the way I practice jobs to be done, is I actually start with almost like a Zen point of view, which is I don't know their story. I don't know what caused them. I'm trying to make sure I understand their language, and it's unpacking all the words they use down to action. And so my thing was somebody say, well, it was just really cool. Well, you can't stop at cool. Or I had trust. I trusted them. Like, all right, what does that mean? And so a lot of times what happens is we don't actually take the time to actually unpack and then codify the data the right way. And so what we've been able to do is at least standardize kind of how deep to go, which is we unpack to action. And so we play pretty much dumb in the interrogation process to make sure we get down to what do they mean? When did it happen? Where did it happen? And what is it like back to the notion of trust. It's like they didn't walk in with something pre-planned presentation. They listened and brought me back 3 options and they told me no. Like that's what caused trust. And so
Would you also say what I found especially in B2B interviews, it's sometimes really hard to keep playing dumb in these interviews?
the thing is that I'll say this is why. So one of the things I talked about is I have this talk called the 5 skills of an innovator, and I really spend the time to talk about empathetic perspective. And what you have to practice at is being able to be genuine about not understanding what they mean. Right. And part of it is a lot of times what I'll see is as I coach people is they'll ask the questions and they'll be either mechanical about it. So what did you mean by that? Tell me more. And it's not like, God, that's interesting. So tell me more, because I don't think I understand that. Like the notion of being able to be engaged in the interview. So I try not to take too many notes during the interview because I'm literally just trying to be engaged in the story and make sure that I can genuinely get out what they mean. The other part is I'm also trying to basically, when I hang up the phone, that I can represent that person at the table when we're building something. And so it's that genuine curiosity and the fact that you're really very interested in what it is, as opposed to the mechanics of, well, just tell, like, so when you think about it as just going through the motions, my thing is the survey becomes the answer and you don't get the depth you need.
So when you say you're trying to not take too many notes to
Well, I
keep
take a lot of notes afterwards.
focused on your interview guests and the process of the interview itself, but what do you do and what do you use later on to analyze and to build your results on? What could you recommend to a person
Yeah.
who's not really that much experienced yet?
So this is the thing that I'm trying to build. I've actually built a couple versions of it, and the notion is it's the debrief. How do we actually take the words that were said and understand how to parse those things into what was a push and what was a pull, right? And so, for example, is part of the push the fact that I couldn't count on my current vendor, or was it the fact of the pull of, but wow, I found a vendor that I could trust? And so what you have to figure out is that, and what you start to realize is most people, especially when you don't do interviews, you assume symmetry, that they're both there, and that what you find is that they're not both there. And so part of it is being able to understand the underlying tone is, are people being pushed to make progress? Are people being pulled to make progress? And so each interview, so the way we did is we used to do interview, and then debrief, right? And then we'd remember each one. But now we do an interview and then we do an hour debrief, and it's a long hour. And sometimes it's we're cut short, but we're codifying all that data right then and there, and then we're literally forgetting that interview for the next interview. So we're not literally building on interviews. We're trying to actually get 10 as independent as possible. I know they're not, but the thing is as independent as possible of like the language and the causes, and all I'm actually trying to figure out is the set of dominoes that play in this market and then what dominoes go together. So in this context, these outcomes go together, and in a different context, these other dominoes go together, but they don't mix. And so I need these let's say 23 dominoes to play, but when somebody actually does something, it's these 3 dominoes with those 4 dominoes and these other 6 dominoes with these 2 dominoes. And so part of it is the underlying, that's why we can do so few interviews, because we're trying to actually just see the underlying energy of what's causing it, both socially, emotionally, and functionally. And then we just reflect those dominoes back into the stories to start to see the initial patterns.
So when you're in a bigger company, for example, like as a middle management or probably a bit higher up or whatever, it probably going to come to the day when you will be asked about quantification and you have to prove that your ideas are reliable. And
Yeah.
you have only a set of 10 interviews. How do you manage that?
So from that process, right, I end up having identified these dominoes, these mechanisms. And so what I've been able to do is then turn that into actually a survey that enables us to talk to people in a way that enables us to quantify. So I can actually do 10 interviews and then we can use it to basically go into different markets. So we did something for a consumer electronic company where we did the first round of qualitative in the UK. And then what we did is we found jobs. And then what we did is we actually then did a few extra in France and Germany and Japan, Korea, and Russia. And we found the language wrapped around it. And then we actually built a survey that we did in all those countries that basically said, is this, as you're looking to switch from A to B, was it more about this or was it, and what was it most about and least about? And so by using an algorithm around the notion of max diff, we're able to actually quantify very, very quickly what what the size of the jobs are and how people move through the jobs. And there's a whole bunch of different things. And so I'll say, and that this is recent development in the last year and a half. And so this is where I've been helping large companies do it. And I'm trying to build a small company version of like, how do you actually do these surveys? But part of it is you have to go through the qualitative side to build the variable set that we actually don't measure, right? So my thing is we tend to measure what's easy or we tend to measure what we can, but so for example, the doctor measures my heart rate, they measure my blood pressure, they measure my temperature, but that doesn't actually help understand, if I'm really sick. It's like, okay, if you have a temperature, it might be that you have we call it, a fever, right? That fever might be because you have an infection, but it could be for 1,000 other things too. And so part of this is realizing what are the more important metrics we need to be thinking about and
So
measuring.
here in Germany, in some parts we have this saying, wer misst. That means more or less in English, like probably something like, who measures much measures mess. So it means like if you don't know what exactly to measure, you're probably gonna mess it up.
That's right. So Deming would always say the fact is you don't know what you're doing if you can't actually turn it into a process or a system. And so part of it is the same thing is the essential part of the system is what are the metrics to know that whether that system is working and the difference between the output of the system and the outcome of the system. So it's like I can serve dinner and that's an outcome to basically as a restaurant, how many dinners did we serve last night? But it's like, how much did everybody eat is the outcome, right? And so the thing is, if I actually have a lot of leftover leftover stuff on the plate, the fact is I might have been able to meet the output, but I actually didn't meet the outcome.
So there are so many interesting things that we could keep talking about still, and there are so many things that we could have learned from you today. But our time frame is unfortunately almost over. But there's one last question I'd like to ask you as a godfather of innovation, more or less. What is your secret? What do you do, or what have you been doing over the years to keep being innovative?
So I like to make stuff. So I've gotten to the point where a lot of the projects in the professional side, I work on a usually a very much longer time frame, anything from 2-3 weeks to there's some products like this book has taken 2 years, right? And so first thing is I believe that the reps is really important. So to me, I actually do around 800 to 1,000 interviews a year. And so I'm always interviewing, always helping people interview, always getting involved in areas where I've never interviewed. And I'm because I'm just genuinely curious. The other thing is the notion of making is really important to me because it's about trade-offs and building something and building skills. And so I've been painting for probably almost, I want to say 30 years, like a long time. So I have like almost 800 paintings. I'll build an online gallery when I get to 1,000. I'm literally have all these different hacks I've built to basically help me figure out how to paint in a very unique, fast way, so I can actually feel accomplishment and learn something along the way. But I'm now in the midst of building a what do you call it? A wood shop, so I can actually start to build physical things, tables, chairs, and just constantly learning and working with my hand in the physical world. So I'm always trying to innovate, and to be honest, part of it is to me to build the skills. Like, I don't believe you can innovate out of the hat. I believe you have to build a set of skills to get to a certain point. And so to me, I'm patient in the skill building side, so I can get to be a place where I can build innovative things. So I'm 55 now, or 54, but when I'm 70, I want to be building innovative furniture, or if I can build innovative software, I'll do that too. So things where I can build things and I can do it myself or with a small team is the most, that's my hobby.
Das war es auch schon für dieses Mal. Ich sage vielen Dank fürs Zuhören und Weitersagen. Alle Links zu dieser Episode findest du in den Shownotes. Um keine Episode zu verpassen, abonniere diesen Podcast auf iTunes, Stitcher oder wo auch immer du ihn gerne hören möchtest. Und wenn du mir und meinen Gästen helfen möchtest und wirklich etwas zurückgeben willst, dann gib uns doch eine 5-Sterne-Bewertung oder noch besser eine Rezension. Wenn du Themenwünsche, Fragen oder konstruktive Kritik hast, dann freue ich mich jederzeit über eine E-Mail an podcast@oberwasser-consulting.de. Sonnige Grüße und bis bald.